Hey everyone, it's Pastor Dave from St. John in Woodbury, Minnesota. Once again, I thank you for checking out today's 5 minutes of hope. And for us, at least here in Minnesota, it is a gorgeous day. You could not ask for a more beautiful day. The sun is shining, the birds are chirping, mid 60s, just a perfect spring day. And so I really hope that wherever you are watching this, the weather is treating you just as nicely. And even more so, I hope and pray that your Holy Week so far, even though it's going to be a very different Holy Week, I do pray that it's a blessed one for you so far. And so we're continuing today with what we started yesterday, which is looking at different aspects of what happened during that first Holy Week. So if you have been tracking along, you'll know that last week we started looking at the book of Lamentations. We'll pick that up next week when we do these 5 minutes of hope. But for this week, for yesterday, today, and then tomorrow, Wednesday, we're going to be looking at some things that happened in that, like I said, that first Holy Week. So this past Sunday was Palm Sunday. The people lined the streets as Jesus came and rode into Jerusalem, triumphantly waving the palm branches, crying out, Hosanna. And then yesterday we saw in Matthew 21 that for Jesus, right after he rode into Jerusalem on the donkey, rode in triumphantly, he cleansed the temple. He healed people. And we focus on how when Jesus showed up, he came to make things right. And now it's interesting that in the chapters to follow, especially in Matthew, so in Matthew's chapters 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25, we see a lot of Jesus teaching. We see a long discourse, and a big chunk of his discourse is on the topic of the day of the Lord, that day when the Lord will return to make all things right. And so what's interesting is when we look at these verses, when we look at Jesus' teaching, ultimately what he's reminding his disciples, what he's reminding us, is that when we see things happen in the world, when we see destruction, when we see wars and rumors of wars, when we see suffering, when we see persecution, when we see hardships, when we see, in our case, a pandemic, it's a constant reminder that we aren't intended to live here on this earth in its broken way for all eternity. That as soon as sin came in the world, God's plan was to restore the world, to make things right so that we can live in his presence in paradise forever. And what's interesting is when you look through human history, people have been looking at major events. Every time there's a major disaster of some sort, people will say, all right, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the time that Jesus will return, that this is the end of the world. And obviously, so far that hasn't happened. But that mentality is not a bad thing. That mentality that when we see destruction, when we see hardships, when we see pain, especially on a large scale, that we are called to lift our eyes off of this world and lift it up to the next world, that world where we get to live with Christ forever. Again, that when we see stuff going on, like in our times right now, seeing the virus spreading, seeing people suffering, seeing people dying, seeing the toll it's taking on families, on economies, on jobs, all of those things, that this is all a reminder that this world is a great gift, but it's a broken world. It's a fallen world. It's not a permanent world. And this time is a time to remember what Jesus says, to lift our eyes up to the Lord, to remember that one day he is going to return, that there is going to be this final day where Christ comes to make all things new. And so we see in these prophecies that Jesus gives in Matthew that some of them were fulfilled back when the Romans overtook Jerusalem in AD 70. But there's also that double effect that, again, he is going to come back someday. And when he does, he says to us that, again, he's going to give to us a new heavens and new earth. And there in the new heavens and new earth, this new creation, everything will be the way it's supposed to be. So again, I guess that's my prayer, my encouragement, my hope for you, especially on this day, is that as you look at the headlines, as you look at everything going on, and again, all the fear that's really being pumped into our world right now, that this would be a reminder that we don't have to be afraid, because this isn't our eternal home. Our eternal home is with Jesus. Our eternal home is in heaven with him, and he's guaranteed that to us because of what he did this week, because he lived for us, because he died for us, because he rose for us, because he lived the life that we could not live, to die the death that we should have died, only to show death that death is not victorious. Jesus is victorious. With all of this going on, again, we're reminded that one day we will experience our eternal and permanent home, and that will be a glorious and incredible day, that day of the Lord, whenever it may come.